Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. So today I wanted to show you how I make my mind maps for both my GCSE revision and now my A-level revision. So I've kind of split this video into two parts, where the first one's going to be how I made them based on the information in the revision guides, and then the second part is going to be more about how I'm using it now in my English A-level, where we don't necessarily have a textbook, but we've been given like tasks where we needed to collate information, so I wanted to make mind maps about them. So if you want to know just about the English one, then I'll just put the time up now where you can skip ahead to, but even if you're doing A-levels but you need to make mind maps out of the textbooks, then this might be quite useful. So we'll run through the science ones first. So first of all, I know that my handwriting is ridiculously small, so I've managed to fit the whole topic on an A4 sheet of paper. But say if you've got bigger handwriting, just use a larger sheet, so say an A3 and fold it up so you can fit it into your revision guide, or just go double-sided on an A4, although I have actually had to do that on some cases. For example, topic 9, there's a second half of it. So I'm going to run through how I made this mind map for biology topic 1. And it's basically the same for chemistry and physics. Whatever I'm doing here, I do for the other two sciences as well. And the main source of the information that I use to make these mind maps is these revision guides. So these are the CGP ones, just the bog standard, like the triple science ones. So first of all, when you look at the mind map, you can clearly see the title is in the middle of the page. And for each science, I chose a different colour. So for biology, I chose green, and then for chemistry and physics, I chose different highlighter colours so that I could distinguish between the two. And then coming off of the title, I then have these subtitles in like an ink pen, just one that stood out amongst all the biro. So these titles relate to the titles at the top of the page. So for example, cells is here and that's that title, specialized cells here, that's that one, and so forth. So I'm not very imaginative when it comes to titles. I literally just copy what is in the textbook for like what they've titled it, because that means that when I'm looking at a mind map and suddenly I need some more clarification, I can go to that exact page in the textbook and there's no, I don't have to rummage through the whole textbook. So let's take this cells one. When I was looking at the page, the first thing I do is I skim read the page, make sure I know everything there and what I want to put onto the mind map. So for this one, I figured that the only important stuff, or the only stuff that I wanted to write down, was the two definitions of eukaryotic and prokaryotic, and then I wanted to do the diagrams for these three cells so that I can annotate them. So here I've got the definitions, so I've written the keyword in capital letters and then just really concisely written the definition in a way that I knew I would remember. And then for the diagrams, I drew them in black biro pen and then annotated them with blue pen just to make it so that it wasn't just like a whole mass of black pen. Moving on to the next branch, I decided that diagrams weren't as beneficial for me anymore, so I just changed to more bullet point sentences. So when I do this, I make sure the title is there, not like a title, but like the heading of the paragraph, and then really concisely again bullet point the key information down. When it gets to say equations and stuff like that, I use the triangles just to save space and make sure it stands out a little bit more amongst all the writing. And where there's a core practical, I don't write it on that under that subheading. So say for example here I've got microscopy on the page. This was a double page spread and the title here was microscopy, and then you can see there it becomes like this part's the practical. So I just put the general information about microscopy down here, and anything for the core practical I left until later. So I just highlighted here that there was a core practical in this specific section. And then up in the top right, I put the core practicals. So for topic 1, there were 4 different core practicals. So I made a subheading here just saying core practicals in short, and then highlighted the 4 titles which corresponded to their place on the mind map. And then just underneath, all I did for the core practicals there was literally list what I would do, so the method for it. So there aren't these in-depth diagrams or loads of equipment or risk assessment, anything like that. That would go on a separate flashcard that I would then use if I wanted to revise the core practicals. So for the mind maps, because I wanted to just know the general information on the topic, I just put the core practicals really short up here. But the main thing is down, and that is the method, because in that you've obviously got all the equipment there, and you've got all the like the chemicals and all of that there. That's all that that's all I really needed to write down for the core practicals. One of the reasons why I separate the core practicals from here amongst all the other stuff is it saves space around these smaller subheadings, and that just leaves me more space to write about them up here, but also because I've highlighted where the core practical is in terms of the subheading and then where it is up here, I can see that if I wanted to know more about microscopy, I can just look over here and there it is. It's all there because I can just link the two highlighted pieces. Obviously you can see that my mind map isn't really colourful. I haven't used a bunch of different colours. I've just used the green highlighter, and that's my main source of colour. If you're someone that needs a lot more colour, then go for it. Maybe you do each subheading as a different colour and then highlight the keywords. But for me, I found that I learn best by reading and just visualizing things, and actually writing down was one of the main sources of revision for me. So it didn't really matter that I didn't include a load of colours, because this is how I best worked. So here's just a look at the other mind maps that I've made for biology. So again, each page is a different topic. So for example, topic 4, there were no core practicals, so it's quite plain. Some of these mind maps I have gone back and highlighted keywords if I thought that that particular topic was quite difficult for me. You can see by topic 8 was quite visual in terms of diagrams, and the heart one I actually used other colours just to distinguish between the left and the right side of the heart. So you will see that sometimes, and it might be quite beneficial to you to do that so that you can kind of visualize things in a better way. Here's a quick look at my chemistry one. So you can see here, I just ran out of room on this part, so I just decided to put a little post-it note, because instead of overflowing onto the back of the page, which I have done on some topics, because it was just that tiny amount of information, I thought there wasn't really much point. And some mind maps were really, really simple. So this topic was really short and there wasn't a lot of information about the subheadings that I needed to write down, but it summarised the whole topic and got it out of the way with. So if you do triple science, you'll know that the physics modules are a lot bigger in the textbook. I don't know why, it was quite annoying to try and fit it all on one page. So for example, topic 1 I overfilled on quite a few post-it notes. Again, it wasn't enough to go onto a separate sheet, but then you move on to topic 3, and here I went on a double-sided sheet just to, again, not worry myself too much about trying to fit it all on one sheet, because if I had tried to, it would not have got all the information down that I needed to. You can also see that, for example, topic 5, there are a lot more equations and diagrams, because that's what physics is. There's not a lot of written information in terms of, or in comparison to, say, biology, but there are a lot of equations that you need to know and certain diagrams that are just better at explaining things than written words. So I've got the circuit up here annotated with blue pen, and all these circuit devices have their own diagram instead of trying to write it all down. This gets the point across. Okay, so the other subject that I made notes from the textbook was geography. So this is slightly different because it isn't split up into the topics like sciences. It's got its own sections, and there are a lot of like subsections. So I thought the best way to do this was look at the content. So each thing is separated into, so say unit 1 is separated into section A, section B and section C. So section A is called the challenge of natural hazards. So that was my main title on the mind map. And then I've got the subheading. So for example, this one I've written climate change because I'm looking at this part of the textbook. So then when you skip to the part that says climate change at the top, the subtitle they've put is climate change, the evidence. So guess what I put? Climate change, the evidence. And that way, again, it just makes it easier to refer back to the textbook if I need to. So there are only 4 subheadings in the textbook for climate change. So there's 4 branches coming off of the title, and then again I'm using just one arrow really. Sometimes I have like evidence there and then I've gone off again, but generally I go by what I call the 2-generation rule. So I've got the first arrow going down to the subheading, and then the second arrow is coming off of those subheadings, just because otherwise you'll start running out of space, because a lot of it is filled with arrows and then it's got those tiny gaps in between that you can't really write anything in. So these are pretty much the same as my science mind maps, but obviously the equivalent of core practicals in geography is the case studies, and I did not include these on my mind maps because there was a lot of information, so I put them on separate flashcards, which I can go through if you want me to, but because this video is about mind maps, I'll leave them out. So that saved me a bunch of room when it came to making these mind maps, because otherwise half of the page would be filled with case study information, and that's just not efficient. So now we're on to the English mind map. So hello if you've skipped ahead and joined us here. So if you haven't seen the science and geography mind maps, the main premise around these mind maps is I've got the title in the middle in a highlighter colour, and then around are the subtitles in ink pen, and then I use black ballpoint pen as my main branch off in terms of information, and then if I want, blue pen. But on these I mainly stick to black ballpoint pen. So the reason these mind maps are slightly different to the science and geography ones is because I was not given a textbook on how to make the mind maps. It wasn't laid out for me in terms of what to put in each thing. I had to go and search my information, and these are ongoing mind maps, so I have obviously left a lot of room, and some more than others, so that I can go back and add on to these as I go through. So these are my context mind maps for English, which I'll use throughout my A-level. So I mentioned this in one of my study with me's previously, but basically this is what I did instead of filling in a grid that my teacher had given to us as homework. So we had a context grid where the top of each column was a different time period, so say Renaissance, Cavalier, stuff like that, and then down the side we had these titles, so key literary works and figures, ideals and origin of the movement, and so on. But I thought the best way for me to do this, because I revise best with my mind maps, was to make mind maps about them. So I chose to do each A4 page is on a different time period, and then I kept those titles from the grid as my subtitles. Again, I don't want to be imaginative when it comes to that, because they worked. These are the titles that my teacher gave me, so those are the ones that I'm going to use. So when I'm writing down information for my mind maps, let's take this bit for example. I've draw off an arrow from the subheading, and then the top I've just put humanism, because that's a characteristic of the Renaissance, and then I've put bullet points about that particular thing or that time period or that person, for example Queen Elizabeth. It really depends on what it is, but when I was researching I found that if I could bullet point things under these mini titles, which aren't in any different colour, then that would be the best way to save space but also put a lot of information down. If you start using a load of arrows, then it can get really wasteful in terms of space, and it can get a bit messy as you try and branch off in different areas. So in general, when it comes to me making my mind maps, I use the same format as you've seen, and I don't really fuss with changing the layout because I know what works for me. Obviously you can experiment and find out what works best for you. I also don't fuss around with colours too much. Each one is colour coded, so for example biology is green, chemistry is pink, physics is blue I think, and then geography is purple, but they don't have tons of colour on them because that for me is really distracting. But if you find that you work best with a load of colour, then go for it. Be creative in terms of what you know works for you, but also don't waste loads of time making these really pretty. I just happen to have small handwriting. That does not mean that I've spent ages trying to make it really small. If you have big handwriting, then don't spend ages trying to fit it all down on one tiny sheet. Go big. I also just use the headers that are given to me. They're the easiest way to categorise information, whether it be what the textbook has used or what my teacher has given me. And it also makes it easier to link back to the revision guide if I want. Especially with my English ones, I've left room for annotations so they're easy to add to in the future. And that's one thing that I find really useful about mind maps, because when you write down pages of notes, you sometimes don't have enough room to then go back and add to them without them ruining your neat notes. One benefit of going small on my A4 sheet is that I didn't have space to write a lot of words. So I was trying to force myself to condense it as much as I could. So there is that balance. Obviously if you've got big handwriting, try and use maybe an A3 sheet, but don't go so big that you've then got tons of room and you're gonna either waste loads of time making it look pretty because you've got room to draw loads of pretty arrows, and you also might be adding loads of unnecessary information which is just going to waste time and they're not going to be useful to you in the future. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I know that for me mind maps were a great source of revision for both GCSEs and now A-levels. If you'd like to, then please hit the thumbs up button and subscribe if you haven't already. I upload every Saturday and sometimes Wednesdays depending on how much I have to do. But thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all next week. Bye!